Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Hill Day Roundtable. My name is Kimberly Ramsor, and I'm the Senior Manager for Policy and Advocacy here at HFA, and your moderator for this session. I'm joined by Lynn Kentz, the Executive Director of Hemophilia Council of California, as well as Sue Martin, the Executive Director for Hemophilia of South Carolina. I'm also joined by my colleagues, Miriam Goldstein, Policy Director, and Principal Legal Counsel here at HFA, as well as Mark Hoberst, Senior Manager for Policy and Advocacy. So I wanted to just give us some background on how the session came to fruition. Last year, if you were fortunate to join us out in San Diego at Symposium then, we had an opportunity to have a brief discussion on advocacy efforts and legislative day planning before each year. And so there are a lot of differences in how each state chapter plans their day. And so we thought that it would be great to have a continuation of this type of meeting. What we didn't know was that we'd also be having a discussion in the midst of a public health crisis. So I want to remind you that this is an open Q&A session, so feel free to start adding your questions below that we definitely want to address. But as you start to talk about them or think of them before you put them in the question and answer box, I wanted to start out with a few questions for Lynn and Sue. So, you guys have had two different experiences on legislative Hill Day planning for this year. One of you being able to still have an in-day or in-person session, and the other one having to plan for a virtual day. Starting with you, Sue, can you please tell us about your experience as you in South Carolina were actually fortunate enough to have an in-person meeting and one of the last few of this year?
Well, thank you, Kimberly. Thank you for having me on. So yeah, and it's funny, I was just watching some video that we're making a new video, and I was telling the panelists just before we got started, we were hugging, everybody high-fiving and all together. And it was just it seems like it was forever ago that we were able to do that. So we had probably one of the last advocacy sessions with many of the chapters. And so our day, basically, we've been doing this for over 10 years and pretty consistently, except for the last several years, really been looking to add legislators at our Hill Day on our training day the night before. So because we are in the middle of the state, we're very lucky with that. And, we advocate and put in our budget to have bring people in for the night before. So what we do is we, prepare our community. We bring them in the night before, get everybody settled, have a nice dinner. And we do our training the night before, what we're going to be looking at doing, what we're talking about. We bring in individuals that have done it before so that they can share the experience with what our newbies are, so that they know that if somebody made it the day before, they'll be okay, advocating the next day, making sure that they're well prepared. And then the next following morning, we go off to the State House. And we did bring in a legislator the night before. He was a newbie, and it was fun for him to really kind of talk about what we need to do and what is the best practices and things of that nature. And so then the following day we go to the State House and we have all of our scheduled meetings. I think we had over 55 this year, so we were able to get those in. We're recognized on the House floor each year, and that's just a big honor to be able to have someone do that for us. And the House floor recognizes us. We stand in the balcony. And then what was really special this year was we had our proclamation from the governor. And so, our forms are very simple on our websites for our State House. And we just asked, can we have a meeting with the governor? And prior coming up to that, now this was pre-COVID, we asked, if we can available. So we had a noon session time that we were going to go over and see if he was available. Well, it was very exciting that he was available, and he actually came out and then he gave us a tour of his offices on the Capitol, and that was very special. And then, we did our thing and left. So we were lucky. I'm thinking about a virtual meeting next year, is frightening for me. I know that everybody after me did it. So there's so many experts here that will help us learn how to build on the back end of doing a virtual, next year if we need to. But it was a great day. And I hope that we can get back to that soon.
How about you, Lynn, since you guys did have to have a virtual Hill Day this year?
Yes. So in California, we have a little bit of a unique situation. So we have 4 patient advocacy organizations that are really boots on the ground serving the community locally. And then the Hemophilia Council really is the collaborative effort of those 4 organizations that then represents the whole of the bleeding disorders population at the state legislative, in the state legislature, and with our regulatory bodies. And so we do our legislative advocacy in collaboration with those 4 organizations that are in our state to be able to do that together and to really be able to speak with one voice with our legislators, with the regulatory agencies that manage programs that we have in our, in California, like Medi-Cal, and we have programs CCS and GHPP that are support our bleeding disorders population, our safety net programs here. And historically, we have always combined a program that we call Future Leaders, which is for youth that are ages 14 to 21, with our legislative days. And we get young people that come down to this, come to Sacramento, come to our state capitol for several days prior to our legislative day, and we do advocacy training with them. And then that culminates with the adults in our community joining them for a legislative day midweek, meetings with our legislators and all of those folks. Well, that normally happens at the beginning of May or late April every year. And that was just obviously not going to be possible this year. So we sort of thought, how are we going to do these programs? Because advocacy is just as important, if not more important, in this era of COVID. Every state legislature across the country is facing budget cuts. More of our community members need supportive services. They've lost their jobs. They've lost insurance. They need all of those things. So how do we advocate for those programs? So we ended up turning our Future Leaders program into a webinar series that we did with youth from around our state. And they did a training series over the course of a month where we met with them and taught them about legislative advocacy and how to tell their story. And they practiced with various different adults in our community that helped them with practicing their legislative meetings. And then we had folks from our community sign up for our legislative day, which we held virtually. And we did a webinar with everyone the night before. We actually offered it at 2 times. We offered it like at lunchtime, and then we offered it in the evening, so that we gave people, 2 different times to be able to log on and participate in that webinar in case their schedules precluded them from participating at one time or the other. So we did our training during that webinar. And then the next day we had about 60 people from our community that we organized into 9 teams, very similar to how we would organize groups based on their legislative districts, just like if we were in person. And we scheduled around 30 legislative meetings with staff or legislators from our state that we conducted all on Zoom. And I will say I was incredibly nervous because anyone who's organized a legislative day before, people run late and things happen. And if you're running around the Capitol and people are rescheduling the meeting or they're running late, you walk in and they're like, oh, hey, we're running 5 minutes late. And you're like, okay, well, we'll stand here and we'll wait 5 minutes. Well, what happens if they're running late for their Zoom call and the people in the group don't know? And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to be a nightmare. How am I going to keep track of all of these meetings that are happening all day long and all of the changes? But it actually went very smoothly. We had a couple of, we did have a couple last minute changes. we really, one of the things we purposed to do is we definitely, similar to, again, if you have a well-organized Hill Day, I think you're always going to want to have like a team captain for each of those groups that you've organized. So we had a team captain for each group. And so I had one point of contact for each team if we needed to make an adjustment or let them know something. And I think one of the other things that was actually counsel that I received from some other people who had been doing virtual meetings in this capacity before is that you want to think about with a virtual Hill Day, and we tried to do this with our teams as well, was, typically when you're doing it in person, you kind of have that time where you're like walking over to the building and you're standing in the hallway beforehand and you kind of organize yourself a little bit and you say, okay, I'll go first and do the introduction and then you can tell your story, right? And it kind of happens a little bit naturally when you're in person with one another. When you're going virtual, you really have to purpose to have your team sort of plan a time, whether they get on the Zoom call 5 minutes early to have that conversation before the staffer is going to get on with them, or whether you, whether they do that the day before or whenever they can schedule that to kind of organize themselves. But we got great feedback from legislators. They were really engaged, and it was, I was really pleased with how it went overall.
That sounds awesome. And what it sounds like is that there are pros and cons to having in-person and virtual meetings. But it's good that you guys both did have positive and great days. But just taking it a step back before you got there, and I know you both reported having high numbers, how do you recruit those participants? Is it something that, those are reoccurring people who show up every year, or how do you get new members to show up? And starting with you, Sue.
So we do have reoccurring, family members and individuals that come here that we're very excited about. But we also listen to the community a lot. I like to have a lot of conversations with them. And when I meet somebody that maybe they called and said that they had a situation happening, I can listen and kind of just hear what's in their voices. And if I sound like there's somebody that I think has a story to tell, I think that's one of the most important things. I just flat out ask them, say, hey, I think you really need to be part of our team. I think you need to come to our advocacy today. It's very, very, very wonderful. And usually that will get people to get involved when they're asked. Sometimes you just have to be asked. And sometimes you have to let them know that they really need that. And it's important that they're there with that voice. So, and of course we do social media, we do mail outs, we do some calling. But we have a pretty good, robust team of individuals that come each and every year. Some of them 10 years all the way through. But just really letting them know how much they need and how much their voice is needed is very important. And I think we can gather them and make sure they're trained so that they feel comfortable and they know that they're not doing this on their own.
And how about you, Lynn? How do you recruit new attendees or keep reoccurring attendees?
Yeah, so the council kind of likes to, in California, we have a long history of doing this event. I mean, well over 20 years that the legislative day has been occurring. So there are definitely a lot of folks who return year over year and participate. One of the advantages that I saw with going virtual was that, California is a really big state, and legislative day, because of the legislative schedule, typically has to happen in the middle of the week. The way that our legislature runs their calendar, we really have to have legislative day on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, which sometimes makes it difficult for people who are working to, take off work and drive up to Sacramento or even fly up to Sacramento. And so we really tried to market it this year with it being virtual as, hey, this is an opportunity for you to participate at very little cost. And you don't have to take a day off work. You don't have to, fly anywhere and have all those expenses. And so that was something that we wanted to capitalize on this year with that. But I think you just try to build upon those people who have had a great experience in previous years, and then obviously encourage new people to participate. And as I mentioned, our partner organizations in the rest of the state are a big part of recruiting and bringing folks, from their area to participate and really understand that it's important that we're there every year to tell our story and for legislators to know. I mean, one of the things in California in terms of a success story, the beginning of the year, we had nearly a $20 billion surplus. But with what happened with COVID, we're looking at like every state pretty much, right? We're looking at a $47 to $50 billion deficit right now. But our CCS and GHPP programs at this point are still fully funded. And the reason that's true is because we have for, many, many years made sure that everyone understands how important those programs are. And so it's important that we just keep doing that year after year after year.
And so I'll also follow up with a question to our other panelist, Mark. As someone who does work closely with the California chapter, are there any other tips that you may have for recruiting new members as well?
Sure. I just wanted to echo a lot of what Lynn had to say about her event. That was the first virtual advocacy day for me as well. And it was quite a surprise that it was as different as I thought it would be from having an in-person event. It was an extremely well-organized event, and that helped to overcome a lot of that. Exactly what Lynn was saying is true. The very first meeting we were on, we realized very quickly that that prep session that we did only a few minutes before, without that, we would have been completely lost. We don't have the visual cues that you have in an office when you're doing this type of format. And after the first meeting, our moderator realized that the meeting would work very well if we kind of switched to the format that we're doing right now, where you have the team captain act as a moderator and hand it off to different people who were assigned a topic to talk about. And that worked very well in filling in the gaps that you had in a virtual meeting that you tended not to have in an in-person meeting. One other thing that we realized right away was the leave behinds that you normally can hand to them and go over without them having that well in advance. That's something else that was kind of a hindrance from when we typically have an in-person meeting. And then you had your surprise tech issues where we wanted to have a screenshot to take a picture, and only the 10-year-old could figure out in the room how to do that. So it was another thing that you just don't think of until you get into that type of setting. But overall, it worked extremely well, better than I thought it would. And I just wanted to really echo what Lynn said about having that prep session beforehand. It would have been extremely difficult to do without having done that.
Hey, and if I can jump in, I know at the federal level, lawmakers have not allowed Zoom to be used. So a lot of times for federal legislative visits, they have required just a phone line, which introduces another level of complexity, and including in terms of the team size. So like Lynn, was that a concern given that you would have Zoom and you would have some of those visual cues?
So we kind of gave the legislative offices the option. We did use the Zoom platform, but as I think probably most people are aware at this point, Zoom gives you the option of either calling in or being on video, right? And so most of the folks we were dealing with were staffers, although interestingly enough, I think we actually got a few more legislators than we probably would have had they been in session, because when they're in session, they tend to be so busy in committee hearings. So most of them would get on and actually show their face on Zoom, but there was a few that didn't. I do think that we kind of learned lessons though about, these were about 15 to maybe 20-minute meetings. So you can't have too many people involved, like you're saying, or they're not all going to be able to have an opportunity to speak. We also learned, I think, that, probably 4, maybe 5 meetings for a group of people in a day was the max, because people are just, they've kind of hit their point of like, that's just, and I think that's even true in-person Hill days too, right? Like if you do 4 or 5 meetings, you're kind of like drained and you're done. And that's very true on Zoom as well. So those were all, kind of considerations that we wanted to take into account.
I think Kimberly might be having a moment of technical difficulty. So I'm going to jump in with a question that goes in a different direction, and because we've been talking a lot about logistics, and just ask about how you go about selecting the issues and the topics that you're going to go up to your state house on. So Lynn talked about continuity and the importance of keeping those state hemophilia programs in lawmakers' minds year after year. Sue, how do you go about picking the issues that you're going to take to the lawmakers each year?
Sure, thank you. So we do somewhat of the same thing as Lynn does. We have some state programs that have worked for us year after year. We want to make sure those fundings continue. So we usually make sure that they know that they're working, or we give the statistics on it. Sometimes we bring in for training the programs, the state agencies that are our Department of Health and Environmental Control. We bring them in and they can explain, give everybody a good sound information on those programs so they're well prepared, with their leave behinds and everything when they go in. And then the second is, again, listening to the community and really kind of trying to find out what's going on. And if there is an issue, is it something that we can tackle? Which is then I go usually to our national orgs and I say, hey, has anybody, talked about this before? Because this is something that we're really struggling in our state. So I think it's really, really important to understand your state, what's happening in your state, what barriers to access to care your members are having, and then trying to find out if that's something that you can do. An example of that was we thought that we have, as everybody I'm sure knows, emergency rooms with people with bleeding disorders can sometimes be very frustrating. So we really wanted to get an emergency room bill. Let's tell them, that this is what they need. Let's get some standards of care for the emergency rooms. And when we started looking into that, there wasn't many bills, if any, in the states. By asking our national orgs and our other state chapters, do you have some sort of a document or some sort of language that we can use for our bill? And so just kind of really seeing what works, what doesn't work, and then what you think, knowing your state, how that can get implemented. We went to our hospitals. We've learned a lot of things about that trying to get an emergency room state bill that might be really difficult to do. So I think, again, just, honing in on your community, some of the issues that you're having, and really building that support system around you with your agencies and your HTCs and your members, and of course our national orgs of what we can do to make that known and educate them is pretty much what we put on each and every year. What's happening now? How is it affecting our community, and what can we do? Is there something that we can really do and elaborate on and possibly make change? And that's kind of where we go. But we always also educate the General Assembly and our legislators, because they need to there's new people coming in all the time, and we need to make sure that they understand bleeding disorders. We all think that everybody should know, and I always tell my children, look, nobody knows about it. Why would they know about it? It's so rare. And it's our job to let people know that these are bleeding disorders, these are our concerns, these are our barriers. And if we can educate you and build some power behind us, usually they take that very seriously, and they understand when we're sharing our stories. And those stories our community members can give to our state legislators are the most important thing. You know, I can advocate all day long, but if I can bring in a member and I say, and now let me tell you, this is their story, that is so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's always the feedback that we get too from lawmakers. How about you, Lynn? How do you, that balance between sort of basic education about bleeding disorders and specific asks, and how you decide what your policy asks are for the year? Do you have something to add?
Sure. I mean, I think it's very consistent with what Sue shared as well. We kind of try to balance it. There's obviously the education piece, and I think we really try to front load our meetings with community members sharing their stories, because I think that's what captures the attention. That's what gets folks to care about the issues that we're bringing forward. And that's what they know, right? We don't necessarily need community members to become experts on some technical insurance issue or, something along those lines, but we want them to be able to communicate their stories and talk about the impact that legislation has. And so we have them share their stories. We usually have a leave behind that has maybe 3 to 4 issues on it. Typically, depending on where we are in the budget cycle, we're either thanking them for their support of the budgetary items that we would have, or we're asking them to support those related to the hemophilia programs. And then we actually do structurally, our organization, we have an advocacy committee that meets every month and that reviews legislative proposals that are coming through, and actually then formally decides whether we're going to take a position on those proposals. So if there's bills that we have a specific support position on, then we may put those in the package of bills that we are supporting then on our legislative day. And talk about those items. This year, for example, our leave behind included talking about, the budgetary programs, GHPP and CCS. And then we also added in, there was not a copay accumulator adjuster bill currently in the legislature to talk about, but we did put that on because we anticipate that that's going to be an issue next legislative cycle. And we didn't really have another bill that we needed to talk about, and we kind of wanted to have an ask, something for them to be thinking about. And so we talked about that and said, hey, this is going to be coming, and so we want you to be aware that this is an issue that concerns our community.
That's great. That's really helpful. I know, when I just started out in advocacy myself as a much younger hemophilia mom, it was always easier for me to go into a meeting if there was a specific ask in addition to general education. And I don't know if you found that that's true for your members generally. And kind of working off of that, in terms of education, it sounds from what you said, Lynn, that maybe general advocacy education is almost a more important part of the training than issues training on the specific policies. Is that correct, or am I mishearing you? And so if you want to follow up after Lynn.
I think so. I really do think so. I think that we usually don't have a huge amount of time to train everyone prior to legislative day. So I personally feel like it's more important to have people be comfortable sharing their stories, and they have the leave behind that they can leave. And we always tell them, hey, if the legislator's office has a question about the issue that we're talking about and you aren't comfortable answering that question, don't try to make up an answer. Don't worry about it. Just write down their question. And that's what I'm here for. That's what our lobbyist is here for. We can go back to that office and have a follow-up conversation with them and answer their question. You're here to tell your story and to let them know that we're concerned about this issue. But Sue may have more to say about that too.
So I wholeheartedly agree. Making sure that the community members are comfortable. I think that's one of the most important things, that when we're training them, we want to make sure that I remember back the first time I ever had a state legislative meeting and going into Washington. And then this year we actually even had on Zoom a US congressman, and that, those things are very frightening. And I think that by getting a lot of training prior to, you feel more comfortable, and the more you do it, you feel more comfortable. So in our state days, we can have a lot of policy in what we're doing, but I think having people share and role play and watch another person, we'll do some role play of letting another person pretend like they're seeing their legislator, and then the other person is, doing the ask or practicing their story. And we break out into groups and let people, practice their story on each other. Because what I have found is that sometimes the very best situation will happen by somebody that you're like, I had no idea they had that much power in their voice. I had no idea that they would be so good. And we had so much feedback that they just, loved their story and they really made an impact. And by educating them, getting who we are as a community to them, that is so important, that when we go in with our asks later on, they understand us, they understand us. They really say, this is a great group of people. Now, what is your concern and what are you looking at? And wow, that really is a problem. That's where we bring in the policymakers. That's where we bring in our nationals. That's where we bring people that, study that on a daily basis and really can ask all those questions and get those questions with the feedback. Like you said, if someone has a question, just give them the sheet and tell them that we'll get back to them. But helping our community really find their voice and being able to share their story in an appropriate way, that training is critical. And they have so much more. I've been just admired by so many of our community members, nationwide, that just can do great storytelling and really storytelling that makes an impact. And they don't even know that they have that within their power. So that's what gets me excited, is to see somebody say, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just did that. And I say, you were incredible. And myself, I'm thinking, gosh, I didn't know they can do that. I didn't think they would be that great. So I think that's a powerful message, that everybody can do it.
I just wanted to follow up on that and, say in my experience working with both of your groups and the other member organizations, it's amazing how they're always so nervous the night before. And really, once they understand that all they need to do is just to tell their story, that they don't need to go in there and, argue all the nuts and bolts of every single issue. They're there to tell their story, and that's it. And that's really all that they need very often, just to relax and do a great job. I did have one question for both of you about what has been your experience working with coalitions, either with other bleeding disorders organizations or with other disease states.
I'll feel happy to go on that first. That is incredibly important. This has been a learning process. When I think back, 10 years ago, and even prior to that, before we had organized state days, our chapter was doing like mini days or whatever. They would bring a couple people in and they would visit with the legislators. They actually, back when recombinant factor just started coming into, the general public, our Medicaid department wouldn't allow that for our Medicaid patients. And it was our chapter members bringing their children in and expressing that they wanted, recombinant factor now to be placed on, the list of drugs that they could provide for the Medicaid department. That was done even before any kind of organized advocacy was done. But as we developed through the years, I've just learned that we're so much more stronger and powerful when we have more people with us that are like-minded in the same coalitions. And so, we would get, NHF, HFA, Hemophilia Fed, everybody that we could. And I'll be honest with you, I just ask. What I have found in the work that I do is if you don't ask, you're not going to get. So when I say, hey, you want to join our coalition? They go, okay. I'm like, great, you're with us. And then we can get a lot more information together. And then now we're even learning to go beyond our bleeding disorder coalition and go outside to other groups like sickle cell or some of the other organizations that maybe have the same, if we're talking about the accumulator adjuster program, that affects not just bleeding disorders, that's a lot of other disease states. So building that coalition with everybody else really helps strengthen the bleeding disorders community. So if you're not doing, building that coalition, I would strongly suggest to try that and just ask and bring them in. We have monthly meetings. We bring them all in. Not everybody can attend every meeting, but just by having them receive meeting minutes and notes and knowing that we are here and we're a partner with them as well, if they have something going on, I think that's incredibly powerful for all of us. So I think coalitions are wonderful.
Yeah, so in California, we have something that we do that's called the Healthcare Access Forum. So that is focused on bleeding disorders specifically, but it's very much a coalition of folks that from, pharmaceutical companies to specialty pharmacies to patient groups. So kind of any stakeholder within bleeding disorders. And we share quarterly about issues that we're seeing that are focused on healthcare access issues and how we can address those within the state. So that's sort of one type of coalition that we engage with. But then there are also groups like the California Chronic Care Coalition or other like rare disease organizations that we partner with, various different sort of nonprofit and also, public sector organizations that we kind of, I'm on lists for and, go to different meetings to kind of, we keep each other informed about public policy issues that we see coming down and ways that we can collaborate. And I am a huge fan of how that can, help make change more effective and be more efficient, and working together we can accomplish more. I will say, just like in a note of caution related to that, I do think that sometimes when you're working in larger coalitions, you also do have to remember like what is your primary mission, because it can be tempting to get sort of drawn into policy areas that really maybe are not a high priority for our specific community's needs. And, you're part of a coalition and all the folks are sending you emails saying, hey, sign on to this bill and sign on to that bill. And, I have the luxury at the council that I'm pretty focused on advocacy and access issues. And so I can maybe dive a little deeper in the weeds. Most of the member orgs of HFA, and because I've worn that hat too, I recognize what that is like. You have a million other things that you're doing that are not just advocacy. And so you can't get drawn into every public policy issue that the coalition that you might be a member of might be part of. And so that would be like my one caution to, coalitions. Just know that sometimes you're going to have to say no to some of your friends if you're part of these coalitions, and say, hey, that's a great issue and I respect why you're pushing that, but it's just not something we can sign on to today.
Those were fantastic answers. Thank you so much. That was such a great discussion of a very complex issue. So both the greater power that we can have when we join our voices with others broadly across issues like Medicaid expansion or accumulator adjuster or rare disease council. But I also so appreciate the cautionary nuance that you add there, Lynn, because we as a national organization have been faced with those same questions, being asked to sign on to things that are not really consistent with our core mission. And so, like you said, always bringing it back to that core mission is the key and the way to answer those questions, at least for us at the national organization. So thank you both so much for that discussion. It was interesting because in the course of talking about coalitions, you both mentioned something which is, it's clear that advocacy is not just a Hill Day, it's a year-round effort. So both the preparation, the keeping your communities informed, but also engagement, both with community members and with lawmakers. And I know both of your organizations do a lot of year-round advocacy. So I was wondering if you could talk about that and then talk about techniques that or strategies that you may have adopted that might be different in this COVID era than you've followed before. Lynn, do you want to start, and then Sue?
Sure. So we're just continually monitoring the legislature, so the budget bills that are going through, and obviously we have our once a year where we specifically go to the Capitol, or this year we went to the Capitol virtually, but there may be other times of year where an issue is coming up and we have to mobilize everyone to communicate with their legislators, whether that's through a letter or an email or a signing a petition or whatever form that might take to let them know that we're concerned about a particular issue. So again, we work with our partner organizations in the state if those messages are urgent to try to get those out through their networks. One of the things, again, with having to sort of turn our legislative day virtual this year that we did, that we really hadn't done before, is we actually created a full sort of virtual advocacy toolkit. And so I told our team when we were working on it, I was like, I'm actually super glad that we're having to do this, because this is something that we're just going to be able to continue to update and use, forever for all the issues going forward, really. Because then we developed, here's how you find your legislator, here's a sample letter that you write, here's how you engage on social media, all of those things that we created for our virtual legislative day this year that we can use going forward for people to be engaged year round when there are issues that come up. And we haven't done this as much as I would like, but it's also, California and everyone's states are going to be different on this. I mean, some states I know have super short legislative sessions where they're only in session a couple of months during the year, and it's almost impossible to meet with them during that time because they're so busy cramming in all of their legislative business into 2 months, and then they're in their districts the rest of the time. But in California, they're in session about 9, 10 months of the year, and but encouraging folks to meet with their legislators in their district. It doesn't have to be going to Sacramento in order to meet with your legislator, and so giving people more tools once they've learned how to tell their story. There's no reason that once we get past some of these COVID things, or to request it via a phone call or a Zoom call during this current era, there's no reason why you couldn't get a meeting with your legislator in their district office and chat with them. So it really can go year round for sure. And that only is going to make the meeting that you have when the issue is pressing, more powerful that you've built that relationship.
We've talked a lot about some of the successes. I was just wondering, maybe you wanted to talk about what was the most unexpected curveball that you've been thrown in one of your advocacy days, and how you were able to get over that?
Well, so, thinking about that, we haven't had too many real curveballs, but we had a curveball that actually turned into, I think it's a good thing this year. We had come in with an actual ask. We wanted to have a bill for a rare disease advisory council. We wanted that in our state. We thought that would be great for bleeding disorders. We actually were hoping that we can, sit on that council. We worked all year to get that bill, introduced. And so we advocated for that during our legislative days. Everybody we did, like I said, we have an assistance program that we advocated for. We educated and made sure that, everybody understood bleeding disorders, but we also advocated for this rare disease bill that we wanted to be introduced. Well, before I got even, and that was on our legislative day, before I even got out of the hotel, packed up, I'm usually the last one leaving, I got a call that our bill was introduced, and that our Representative Leon Howard had introduced it on the House right after we had left. We were in the balcony, we had left and did our Hill Days, and that was introduced and read that day, which was a great thing. But then when I got the language for the rare disease bill, I said, well, wait a minute, that's not exactly, where did that come from? That's not exactly what we said. And what they did, it's kind of a long story where we worked with our Department of Environmental Control of who is going to house this bill and stuff. And they already had a very good, robust program for a newborn screening council that they had. And so what they did, they had asked us in some of our meetings, would we mind working with their researchers, their medical experts, and things like that they had already had established. And of course, when you're trying to, get something passed and somebody to house something and fund it and work with it, you're gonna be a partner and care. So we said, sure, we can all work together. Well, what ended up being was that was introduced as a newborn screening and rare disease advisory council, and kind of combined together. And at first, we're kind of like, wait a minute. But then when we really thought about it, had COVID not happened, being with our legislators, with our offices and stuff, we probably would, and hopefully we'll be able to reintroduce that and get that passed. So that curveball really turned into a good thing, because I think that there's a real strong possibility, and it's still rare disease, whether it's newborn screening with a rare disease or rare disease, but it's all put together, and our voice will be heard. So that was kind of a good curveball, but it kind of threw me back for a few minutes.
So I actually started in this role at the council in January. So I would say, we've talked a lot, obviously, about going virtual, but that was a pretty big curveball. I was in the middle of planning, and for me, my first Future Leaders and Ledge Day, even though the council has a long history of both of those events, they were my first Future Leader and Ledge Day, and suddenly I had to take them virtual, and so that was a pretty massive curveball in terms of trying to shift them. And obviously, we've already talked a little bit about some of what we did in order to accomplish that, and there were certainly, I look back on all of it, and there's absolutely things that I would do differently, and felt like I learned out of the process in terms of, with Future Leaders, we needed more time to do certain things that we were trying to do with the kids, and just, different things that I would organize or structure differently. But I do think that the silver lining in some ways out of this is that we have learned that we can do things virtually. And as much as I am, going to be as excited as everyone else to be able to get back in the Capitol and do our meetings, do our meetings in person again, California is a huge state. And, most of us across the country in our organizations have geographic challenges of trying to bring people together. And so if we can turn our training for advocacy and even our conducting of advocacy, I think, into like a hybrid of some things being virtual and some things being in person going forward into the future, I see it as a huge opportunity potentially to engage more people, hopefully in the future. Not everyone, like we talked about before, is always going to be able to take the time off work and come to the state capitol to be able to participate. So let's find more avenues for how they can participate. Maybe they can participate on social media. Maybe they can go do a district office visit that's by their house. Maybe they can come to Sacramento, in our case. So I think it's forcing us to think out of the box in ways that is great. And that's, I guess, what's good about the curveballs, right? Is when we get faced with challenges, we have to think differently than we have before. And hopefully we make some, lemonades out of the lemons in the process. So.
Thank you. That was another great discussion. And I just wanted to throw out there that HFA has a legislative action center. We have a basically online tool that we can use and we can make available to state and local member orgs to customize and set up for their members to reach out in some of those innovative ways or online ways or in between Hill days. So to that year-round advocacy. So I don't think that we've done it for South Carolina or California yet, but like New York, we were able to work with the New York Bleeding Disorders Advocacy Coalition when they had to cancel their in-person Hill Day, and they gave us what their asks were. We were able to personalize the system, include their logos, and set it up so that they could give their members a link, and their members could send emails on their specific bills. The tool links them to their personal legislators, and we can also do it for social media. So please keep that in mind. Please contact us. It's really quite easy for us to do, and a couple of states have taken us up on this so far. New York did. Virginia, where I live, had to cancel its Hill Day very abruptly and was able to work with us to configure the system so that people could do that kind of outreach. And like you say, they don't have to do it when the legislature is in session. Right now, maybe an in-person in-district meeting isn't available, but this is a way to make that contact even if the legislature is not in session right now. So little pitch for that. And Sue, I don't think we got back to you to talk about that engagement beyond the Hill Day. And I know one of the things that you do is you do a lot of outreach through your members around Bleeding Disorders Awareness Month. And I was wondering if you could talk about that, if you view that as a really good entry point for grassroots advocates to kind of get their grassroots chops going, or can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So we've now got an advocacy ambassador program. So once we went from the coalition, we knew that we needed to get more members, and some members aren't ready to do something every month, but they can still be trained year round, and they have so much to say during the year, and their power in getting proclamations done is unbelievable. So what we do is I kind of put a whole advocacy calendar together in November or so, where we have 4 training days, bringing all of our advocates, all of our members new members, new advocates together again, bringing them together for like a Saturday. We do a lot of training, bringing our national orgs, kind of what's going on, what we're going to be looking at in the upcoming session, and then preparing them. We started in January, preparing them for Bleeding Disorders Awareness Month, and helping them, giving them every tool they need, making it very simple, I find, is something that really helps build upon that. People are extraordinarily busy. They want to help out, but they have very little time sometimes. And now in our virtual world, all these, I don't have little children anymore, so God bless every one of you that are juggling school and work and at home and what you're doing with your children. But if we can make things very simple for them, they can go out and do their own work. And this year we were just blessed to have, I think we had almost 30 proclamations throughout the year, that each and every county, we gave them every single thing they needed. They went out, they got their proclamation asked. Usually we have readings, but of course they couldn't do that with COVID. So now we're doing meetings on Zoom. We're having one in a couple of weeks. Just really, I think, making sure that we're engaging them in the off season of the legislative season, having them go in and try to do whatever they can, making relationships with their local reps in their towns, their mayors, and just empowering them year round and checking in. I think checking in with them is very important, and keeping that robust year round advocacy is incredible. And then giving them a little bit of kudos and some fun. We've done some fun things after we've been together for the day. They got to have a little bit of fun. So if you can build that into your program after a long day of sitting and listening and working, give them something fun to do, build that base of a community, advocacy community, and it'll go far.
Just in the last few minutes that we have, is there, perhaps Lynn and then Sue, is there one piece of advice that you would have for somebody who wants to be a more active advocate?
I think just, Sue talked about the Bleeding Disorders proclamations. I think that you can just start even by getting involved in your local community, right? And whether that's, your kid's school, your local school board, tracking your local city council, knowing who your representatives are and getting on their email list, your state level folks. And keep in mind, those local people are typically the pipeline to work their way up the process, right? So somebody from your local county or city might be the next person that ends up in your state legislature as you build those relationships, and just kind of start being informed. And then, once they start doing in-person things, you can go to, they have little community events where you can go and talk to them and share your story and with them and at a little community event, and just kind of start working your way up from there.
And I just say in closing, I know we're at the end of the meeting. If you think that advocacy is for everybody, and every single person can raise their voice, every single person can do it, you just have to make a commitment. You have to be a little bit brave. You have to say, I can do this. I can share my voice. Get together with your chapters. Our chapters are incredible advocates with what they can do, and tell them that you want to share your story. You want to be part of that process, and everything else will come into place and you'll be just fine. So thank you.
I want to thank our panelists. I know that you both have run phenomenal Hill Day programs and phenomenal year-round advocacy programs, advocacy training and planning. And I am so grateful that you were willing to share your experiences and your words of wisdom with us today. Thank you, everyone, for bearing with us through the technical difficulties. And we miss Kimberly terribly. The technical difficulties were severe enough that she had to drop off. But again, thank you to our panelists, thank you to our audience, and thank you to all advocates who stay engaged and active. Take care. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.